Hi, I'm Pinky Van-Lare and I'm excited to be having a conversation with Alan Nance, VP of Technology at Royal Philips. Thank you very much for joining us today, Alan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I've got a few questions for you if you don't mind. So at Philips and before that at ING, you've done a lot of work with changing the way that technology services are designed and sourced. How would you sum up that change?
I think it's a very significant change, Pinky. If we look at the last century, the dominant sourcing model in our industry was basically our mess for less. So we would design and build infrastructures, and then we would pass those on to the suppliers who would run those on a service level. And core to that was the thinking that the assets are very expensive, so you wanted to really leverage those assets as best you could. So a lot of emphasis was how those assets would become available and how they would be accounted for and managed. And we would dictate that to a large degree to the people that were taking on those sourcing engagements. If we look at the new century, the IT infrastructure has become incredibly dynamic. And there's so much change, so many providers, and assets change all the time, which you could argue that the value of an asset is almost zero from the moment that it's put into service. Now that means that only very large IT suppliers like HP, IBM, ITaaS, or the hyperscale suppliers like Amazon, Google, Azure can offer those types of services to the large enterprises. Now that's a very different way of working, because now instead of telling them what assets and how those assets are used, the focus is much more on outcomes. So we're talking much more about IT as a service, ITaaS, where we are defining the outcomes and the supplier is responsible for the outcomes, whereas we're much more responsible for performance managing the suppliers to make sure those outcomes come through.
So there's a lot more streamlined focus into the whole IT discipline.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, I hear a lot about invisible infrastructure or zero infrastructure, but what exactly does it mean and how does that fit into your strategy?
That's a good question, Pinky, because we're always good at making up these new terms. When I think about zero infrastructure or invisible infrastructure, then I would look at it from two perspectives, financial and managerial. If we start with financial, in the old days, as we said, assets were very important. So we would have to come up with an investment request. We would purchase assets. We would have to depreciate them. We'd put them into registers. We'd have to track them and dispose of them afterwards. Today, none of that happens. We don't deal with assets. We have no assets, which means disappeared, invisible, exactly. So that means that we now have a true invisible infrastructure from finance perspective. So our financial executives, when they look into the books, they don't see any assets. They see an invisible zero infrastructure. Second part of it is the managerial part of it. So from a managerial perspective, in the old days, we were obviously managing whether systems were up or down and performing well and doing incident management around that. None of that is done by us now. That is all done by the suppliers. So that also means that from an executive managerial perspective, the focus has changed from managing groups of people that operate systems to now managing smaller groups of people that do the performance management tasks. So it's from a management perspective, you also have a almost invisible infrastructure or zero infrastructure as well.
So it sounds like a big change for the whole IT, the way in which the whole IT department works.
It's a big change, and it means that not just the way IT works, but all the organizational parts that support IT have to change. So the way in which we do procurement, the way in which we do contracts, the way in which we manage ourselves, the cultural aspects, compliance aspects, security aspects. So it's a very big change for the organization. In the old days, we were responsible for everything. And if I give you one example, our legal department would send out terms and conditions, and the suppliers would sign those, and then they would engage with us. Well, today that doesn't work. Amazon, Google, they don't sign those types of agreements. You either use us or you don't, you use it according to this standard catalogue. So that's been a big change for people in legal, same way in procurement. You now basically procure services outside of RFPs based on what they write down in their catalogue and whether it's useful or not for the business. Very different way of working. And also culturally, we have people who've put their kids through college or plan for pension based on their ability to manage systems. And now they're being asked to use those talents in different ways. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. So yes, big cultural changes.
So cloud is another term that is frequently mentioned. What exactly does it mean?
Well, I always say that the first thing we need to understand about cloud is there is no cloud. You're really just using other people's computers. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, how can I best make use of other people's computers? And for me, we want to do as much as possible on other people's computers. And we want to do that in a way that we don't have startup costs, we don't have termination costs, and we only pay for what we use, and that it's in a secure environment. So that is basically what the cloud is. The cloud is your ability to use other people's computers to realize your strategy. And there's lots of variations, but I would say this: if at any time you still feel that you are directly connected to an asset, that you own an asset, it's not cloud.
So what proportion of your technology services at Philips would you say belongs to the cloud?
Well, I would like to think that everything belongs in the cloud. What we have done at Philips is we've moved the newer technologies, we've moved first. And about 30% of our IT services are delivered through the cloud today. I expect that to rise quite significantly over the next few years, and that could be as high as 70 or 80% of all of our services through the cloud.
So what do you think is driving the shift to these new industry models? Is it specific to Philips, or does it apply more widely?
I think it's not a Philips problem. I think what we're looking at is a huge transformation in the way we do business. And basically it comes down to this. In the old days, companies like Philips had a monopoly on certain things. If you wanted to develop the best products, you used to have a very tight, highly skilled research and development group. If you wanted to distribute products, you wanted to have a massive distribution network that you owned, and you wanted to have a big brand in order to do that. Today, none of that is true. Scale is no longer an advantage. Speed is the advantage, which means that you now have to reach out, you have to connect to other people. And as the world becomes more connected, then there are more smart people outside your enterprise than inside it. That's always been true, but now they can connect in ways they couldn't connect to before. So the next innovation could come from two guys in India with an iPhone. It's not necessarily coming out of these, historically significant R&D centers. So what that means is that every company has to be more open. Every company has to think about changing the way it runs its supply chain, how it finds the new talent. And that's not just people, but also goods, services, how it connects to them and how it connects them to its brand. And I think that's going to be true for every major enterprise.
It sounds really exciting.
It's incredibly exciting. It's also new. And for a lot of people, it's scary. If you've invested millions of dollars in the best distribution network in the world, and Alibaba comes along and disrupts that overnight, that's really scary. If you've invested in having the best R&D people and two guys in India are coming out with a product better than yours faster than you can, that's scary. And you see a lot of these companies collapsing under the pressure of supply chain movement. Another great example is Tesla. We always talk about Uber. I think Tesla's amazing. Here's a guy who's created, in a very short period of time, a full-service car company that has a huge valuation over companies that have been doing it for nearly 200 years. And so it's very exciting, but it's only really exciting if you're on top of the change, if you have your strategy intact, and if people like me are providing the infrastructure as a service to the enterprise that enables them to take advantage of all these fantastic opportunities.
So I often hear people refer to these changes as a journey. Can you describe your journey?
Yeah, I think that's a really good term, Pinky, because when I explain things today, I think we sound a lot smarter than we were when we started. We've learned a lot on this journey. You start off with an idea of what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and how long it's going to take. And to be honest, we've had lots of surprises for us along the way. Things around, legal contracts, procurement styles, cultural aspects internally, but also with the suppliers. And we've learned a lot about how to do this that we didn't know when we started. We didn't anticipate having to do things that we've done, which includes things like building security capabilities in our cloud providers, changing contractual terms. Yeah, so I think the word journey is very, very appropriate, Pinky.
So you've had to be quite adaptable to change, haven't you?
Well, not just I, because if you look at all the other people that are involved in this, so imagine all these architects. So these architects are people who are highly skilled, who are used to being very hands-on in terms of designing and building infrastructure, who now have to take a step back and use their talents to help the suppliers understand what needs to come out of it, not what it needs to be or how it needs to work. It's a big change for them. Or you talk about procurement people who can no longer fall back on standard RFPs because you're looking to make the best use of standard catalogs that Amazon or Google or Azure are offering you. Those are big changes for those people as well. And for some people it's easier than others. As always, some people say, this is cool, I'm on it. And other people are like, hang on, I'm not sure this is good, we're giving away too much, we're losing control. And all of those emotions play a role in the project as much as the formal project plan does.
I see. So on your journey, did you hit any stumbling blocks at all?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think one of them was compliance, reassuring the people that are responsible for compliance that there was virtually no risk here, that we could still meet our regulatory requirements. Working with legal. When legal came to terms with the fact there's no real jurisdiction in cloud contracts, how do we deal with that? That was a roadblock for us. I mentioned the cultural things. So yeah, a couple of those. And I think the way to get around this, if there's one thing that I've learned more than anything else, it's the concept of multidisciplinary teams. So not just IT thinking up something and then going to legal and saying, can you make a contract, but having everybody in the room, beginning to end, everybody understanding every move that you're making and putting their input in early so that everybody makes the change at the same rate. Otherwise, what you find is that everybody in the chain starts their change after you've completed yours, and they don't understand why, and you've got to argue against the resistance all the way through. So having a multidisciplinary team from the start, I think, is absolutely essential.
Absolutely, that sounds right, because then you can adapt and interact with all the different stages, can't you, in that way?
And that's very important, that everybody feels like they're still giving input to the process. They're not being outmanaged, or they're not being confronted with it's a black or white situation they're in. And if people can follow the change, and if people understand why this is a conversation piece, I think they can react better to it.
You've often worked with moving new technology to the cloud, but it's often said that legacy is a lot more difficult to handle. Would you agree?
I think it's absolutely true. If you're working with born in the cloud companies that have applications that are specifically written for the cloud, this is a lot easier. It's a lot easier. If you are working with some of your legacy systems, some of which can be very old, it is a real challenge. And the real challenge sits in the fact that it's not just the application. The application itself can be a challenge, but it's also the underlying databases and infrastructure. So if you look at, for instance, like Amazon and Google and Azure, they have a concept of a database system that you can use as a service. And if you can get your application to work on that, then you don't have to worry about licensing and upgrades or anything like performance, because that's in that stack. Now, a lot of our applications run on older versions of databases or infrastructure that are heavily connected, or maybe even strongly defined that you can't just do that. So moving those to the cloud is less financially attractive because you're still responsible for licenses and you're still responsible for the performance of the stack that you put in there. You don't have the same freedom that you would have in the other scenario. And the analogy I would use is, imagine, Pinky, you and I are doing this amazing journey to Greece, and we're going to rent a car here in the UK, and we're going to go off to Greece. Now, we're in the UK, we're driving on the left-hand side of the road. We expect to get in that car, we expect to be able to drive it through Europe, we expect to be able to, fill up the tank wherever we go, fill up the tyres if necessary, and get there on motorways, on side roads, as quickly as we can. Agreed?
Agreed.
Now, with the cloud, that's true. So the cloud is scalable, the cloud can take you virtually anywhere, and you only pay for what you use along the journey.
You picked Greece.
I picked Greece. It's better weather. Now, if I'm doing legacy, what happens? I get in the car, across the channel, suddenly I find out I don't have all the windows on the other side, the mirrors on the other side. So my visibility to my around my car is more limited. Imagine my car is limited to 40 miles an hour. Can't get onto the German autobahns. I'm going to be a huge hindrance to them. Imagine that I have high octane fuel and I can't fill up the gas everywhere. I've got to choose the countries that provide that high octane fuel. Or the gauge for fixing my tyres isn't the same in every country. I've got to plan that out. So the net is I can get to Greece, but I've got to really plan out that journey, and I've got to overcome a number of obstacles to get there. That's like the legacy. Now you can get to the cloud, but it's a much more thoughtful journey with much more impediments, and it'll take you longer generally, and the performance won't quite be the same. But you can get there, and we've had some very, very big successes moving traditional applications into a cloud environment with, for instance, SAP and HANA, and they've saved us lots of money and improved our performance. But the general message is moving the new technologies to the cloud is easier than moving the legacy. But it's not impossible, and you should still embark on that journey.
So how do other initiatives like DevOps or Lean fit in, and are they complementary or compete into the change?
I think they're very complementary, Pinky. If you look at DevOps and you look at the work that Andrew Clay Schaefer and Gene Kim have done, essentially what they're trying to deal with is this paradox we have between development and operations, which means that development people are always trying to change things and operations people are also trying to keep them stable. There's a natural conflict there. The challenge that you have right now is because you want to update things continuously. And you'll see that in your mobile app. You'll see that on, every time you go into your computer, you see that Java wants to download or Adobe wants to download. Everybody wants to get their software out on the fly. Tesla is a great example. They're going to be downloading software to your electric car all the time, which means you have to solve that paradox. And what DevOps really does is, as the operations moves more into a cloud environment, preparing you for that continuous delivery stream. So in my mind, it's very, very complementary. Now, when we look at Lean, Lean has a very different importance, I think, for the way we run our IT organizations and we run ITaaS. Okay. Because if you're looking at the outcomes, you have to spend more time defining the outcomes. What is it that I want? Which means if you're looking at a service, you really have to think about what's critical to the quality of this service, which is Lean. The whole Lean Six Sigma, designing for Six Sigma, is about understanding all of those things that are critical to quality and then designing to make sure you hit that. So you design for availability, you design for security, you design for performance. Now, given the fact that we are no longer going to be doing all the infrastructure work, we're not designing, building and running that. We have to spend much more time designing for Six Sigma, and that's how I see the role of Lean fitting in.
Thank you so much for your time, Alan. I have loved your analogies and all your explanations. I've got one final question for you. Now, if you were to move on from your current role, how would you like this program to be remembered?
So I haven't been asked that question before, So that's, let me just think about it. I think I would say there are two things that I would like this program to be remembered for. The first one is when the executive committee sits down, that they now have the ability to synchronize their IT expenditure to their revenues. Executive committees are very much focused on P&L. They're very much focused on working capital and how to make the company tick. And today, technology is a huge cost. It's a huge investment area. It's also a huge cost area for many, many companies. So the idea that they can spend exactly what's required to match the revenue, whether it's growing, shrinking, or whatever it's doing, is peace of mind for them. Now that concept that I call revenue synchronicity, I think would be a huge deliverable from IT to the business. The second thing that I think is important is the viability of the company and helping the company to make new choices. So by creating this amazingly flexible infrastructure that is cloud-based, that's consumption-based, we now enable a supply chain that can be much more agile, where we can define new products and services and we can connect them to our supply chain so that we can deliver new value to our customers faster than anybody else. I think if those two things are evident at the executive committee level, we've done an outstanding job, and I'd be really, really pleased to have that on a tombstone. Not too early, but at some point.
Thank you very much for your time, Alan.
You're welcome.